Welcome to Move the Chains with Jonathan Rivers on Fox 54, sponsored by Realtree. Here's your host, Jonathan Rivers.
Let there be football. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Jonathan Bam Rivers. The top 25 preseason AP college football poll recently came out. And you know I've got some thoughts on it, but I'm not going to go back and forth on who deserves to be in and who doesn't. I just got some big picture thoughts on some of these programs in the top 25, and I'll tell you what they are. And you won't be surprised that there's a conference with double-digit teams in the preseason top 25. Also on the show today, you know I'm going to go to your social media questions. There's a unit that I think is being overlooked in the SEC that may have the biggest impact. That question will be answered and more right here on Move the Chains. And in my nonsense narrative, you know how people sometimes say, well, that was a good loss for this team, and they try to make that argument of why a team should be in the college football playoff? Never bought it. And I'm going to tell you why on the nonsense narrative today. And then the final drive, there's a quarterback on a team that made the college football playoff last year that's probably a contender this year, whom you need to respect, because he's a reason that there may not be one of the greatest players in the future can't hit the field right now. All that and more on Move the Chains today, but you know how we do it. Let's kick it off with first down. All right, so the AP Top 25 preseason poll just came out. And I know you've probably seen it, but I want to show it to you here again. When you take a look at this poll, one, if you see all the highlighted teams, other than Clemson, all of those teams are SEC teams. 9 SEC teams in the top 25. But listen, I'm not here to sit here and tell you Texas doesn't belong at 4, they should be higher or lower, or Oklahoma's a team that needs to be higher than 16. I'm not here to do all that today. What I am here to do is go big picture on some of these programs and kind of where I think they are and where they may be as the season unfolds. So I want to start with the Texas Longhorns. 3 years ago was Steve Sarkisian's first year in Austin. Texas was 5-7. And I know in today's college football, most people would think that even though it was his first year, he'd be on the proverbial hot seat or he should be gone. And I know that because a lot of people said it. And I remember what I said at the time. I said at the time, it doesn't matter what Texas does record-wise in their first year. It matters what's being built in their first year. And then they follow that with an 8-5 season. Then they follow that in the season last year and being a double-digit win team, kicking that off with going on the road and beating Alabama in Tuscaloosa and turning that into a college football playoff berth and being one game away from playing for a national championship. The Texas Longhorns are a program that's had to shift via the transfer portal, though, because the receivers they had last year in A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy, they're now in the NFL. So that's why you go out and get guys like Isaiah Bond from a rival Alabama whom you just beat. You go out and get a Silas Bolden. You go out and get a Matthew Golden. This is what Texas is. Now, there is a concern for Texas. They have 2 running backs, especially C.J. Baxter, who's going to be their starter, that are out for the season. But this is why you try to recruit at a high level. So this is what I see about the Texas Longhorns. Steve Sarkisian came in and was able to build his program, and it didn't happen overnight. And I think that's the best thing that could have happened for this program, because even struggling in their first year, to me, was better than having a flash-in-the-pan season and then digressing. They had a tough season, and now they're progressing. So if we take a look at this poll again, there's a team that a lot of people are in limbo about when it comes to the expectations, and that's who's ranked directly behind the Longhorns in this AP poll, and that's the Alabama Crimson Tide. And like I said, people can't question the talent that Alabama has, because even in Kalen DeBoer's first year at Alabama, the recruiting has been phenomenal that he's been doing. But a lot of people are questioning the expectations because Saban's no longer there. And I was on a show this week where somebody was telling me, hey, Jonathan, you do know that the Alabama expectations are not going to change just because Saban's not there. And I responded and said, I agree, and they shouldn't change because Saban is not there. But what I'm saying, what I've always said is that just because Nick Saban is not there doesn't mean Alabama won't be a contender, but don't expect Alabama to be what it was under Nick Saban. Those are 2 separate points that are being made. And when I talk about cornerstones, I continue to talk about Jalen Milroe and Malachi Moore. I also don't want to forget about Elijah Pritchett, who's from Columbus, Georgia, went to Carver High School. He will be one of the best interior linemen in the conference and probably the entire country this year. Alabama won't lack in a lot of skilled positions. They won't lack on the offensive line. The only thing we have to understand is Alabama this season there are some games that you need to make sure that you pay attention to when it comes to the Alabama Crimson Tide. Because this is not a team that ever runs away from their schedule. This is not a team that has any issue with whom they're playing. But I do want to remind you that there's a potential trap game on October 26th, okay? And that's after having gone on the road to play Tennessee and before having to go on the road to play LSU. And I know they have a bye before LSU, but Missouri is a good football team. And what I'm telling you is, let's say Alabama ends up beating Tennessee on the road. Even in a win, we don't know what it will look like from a physical standpoint and from a player health standpoint after that. So tough games on the road may result in wins, but a lot of times you have to see what happens the game after when you talk about ramifications in a game that physical. All right, now back to the poll. Here's another team that I want to make sure people are paying attention to, and that's the Tennessee Volunteers. A lot of people understand this, and this is something that I truly believe in. One play doesn't make a game, and one play doesn't truly make a season. But I promise you, sometimes certain situations can determine how teams play moving forward based on their mental psyche and how things fall out. Do you remember last year, Tennessee went on the road and they were beating Alabama 20-7 at the half and receiving the ball to start the second half? And then when they received the ball to start the second half, there was a special teams foul up. And Alabama went on to score the next 24 or so points in a row, and Tennessee had no shot, and then subsequently went on to lose games against Missouri and Georgia before righting the ship and finishing 9-4. This is a dark horse team for me, and I know they're top 15 preseason, so in a lot of people's minds, they're not a dark horse, but they're not picked by a lot of people to finish in the top 5 or in the 6 in the SEC. So yes, I consider them a dark horse. I think offensively they have one of the most explosive and potent offenses in college football, but losing a starting linebacker in Elijah Herring and also losing all of your defensive backs can be an issue. Their front, along with James Pierce, will be solidified. Can they mature in the secondary throughout the season to try to deal with some of these potent offenses in the SEC? If the answer to that is yes, I can definitely see Tennessee being a dark horse, not necessarily playing for an SEC championship, but it could happen, but being an outright at-large bid for a college football playoff. Now, Tennessee is a team that everybody's keeping their eye on, especially me, but there's a team ranked right before Tennessee and Clemson that a lot of people have closed the door on. A lot of people are selling stock on Dabo Swinney, and this is what I'll say about Clemson, everybody. In the last 5 seasons, Clemson has averaged almost 11 wins a season. Their floor season, which means their worst season in that time, was last year, and they were 9-4. I was saying that Dabo Swinney may regret in the future not using the transfer portal if he decides that's how he wants to run his program. But what he's done is run a program to where he's got 14 returning starters, and Clemson has never been a team that has not recruited at a high level. They've now got an experienced and physical offensive line. Clade Kubnick is back as a second-year full starter when we understand that transition from DJ Uiagalelei, who transferred to Oregon State. So there's a lot of cohesion in this program, and that's something that Clemson hasn't had to deal with, is a lot of transfers coming and trying to rebuild a culture. The culture has been set. And for those that say, hey, Clemson was gutted by the transfer portal, they had 12 guys leave in 24, well, this is what I'll say. A lot of those guys were walk-ons. They were also 4-year players who are now moving on with their last year of eligibility, and a lot of people who sustained injuries. So if you think Clemson is a program that's going to falter this year, I'm just not in that camp. I do want Dabo to be more aggressive in the transfer portal moving forward because I think it'll be needed, but Clemson is still a viable team here when it comes to the college football playoff and winning the ACC. All right, that's it for First Down. When we come back for the break, it'll be your social media questions. We'll be back with more Move the Chains right after this. And welcome back into the show. And before we get to your social media questions, as always, I want to take this time to thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for this opportunity of hosting Move the Chains. I want to thank you, the fans, for your support, for your admiration. Your feedback has been phenomenal, and this wouldn't happen without you. And of course, last but not least, I want to give a shout out to the best production crew in the business. Now, you don't understand what these men and women go through to make sure this show runs smoothly. So I always want to give a big shout out to the best production team in the business. Thank you truly. All right, you know how we do it. It's time for Second Down. All right, so this is an opportunity for you, the fans, to address me, and this is my chance to get to know you a little bit better, understand the way you're thinking when it comes to college football in this instance, so I definitely want to take to your questions. So let's run the first one. What unit may have the biggest impact in the SEC in 2024? I don't hear a lot of people talking about Georgia's wide receiving unit, and I'll just say pass catchers, but I think you should. And it's not just because you've got guys like Arian Smith and Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett and Kobe Young. My point is, I think in all of those receivers, you've got everything that a receiving core needs. You've got deep threats. You've got possession receivers in Arian Smith and Dominic Lovett. You've got your red zone beast, I think, in Kobe Young to go along with guys like Oscar Delp at the tight end position. And also, it's really success by a culmination of what Georgia is. They're going to have one of the best offensive lines in football and one of the best running back rooms and groups in football, which means that play action pass is going to be a tremendous weapon for Carson Beck, who's looking at being a top 5-10 pick in the NFL draft next year. A lot of people don't talk about Georgia's wide receivers because it's not their identity. I promise you they will have a huge impact on Georgia's opportunity to try to win their third championship in 4 years. All right, what do we have next? What team may benefit the most from an expanded playoff format? I actually think there are two teams here. Penn State being the first one, because they're a team that's consistently finished in the top 10 or top 12 under James Franklin, but because they haven't been able to beat Michigan or Ohio State, they've never had a chance to play for a Big Ten championship and make the college football playoff. They have that opportunity now. Now, Oregon's added to the Big Ten, USC and UCLA as well. So it does get easier for Penn State, but they're a program that has been consistently good. They just haven't been good enough. And now I think with the expansion, they're good enough. But also Ole Miss. Why is Ole Miss such a tough out for people? And you can see them when they beat Alabama some years and things of that nature. They can compete with the Clemsons and Ohio States. Because one, athletically, they take a backseat to no one. They have an offensive guru in Lane Kiffin. And by guru, I mean somebody who is very innovative when it comes to scheme and when it comes to personnel on the offensive side of the football. They will score points. And in the game of football, when you get into a one-game scenario, it doesn't have to be the best overall team. It needs to be the best team that day. And that offense in Ole Miss will always put pressure on you, and so will Lane Kiffin. All right? What's the last question we have? How will USC fare in the Big Ten? Well, let's think about what the Big Ten has been for the past decade. They've been a defensive-minded conference. And I think a lot of people try to put that on offenses not being good. Well, I know Michigan's offense, Ohio State's offense, Penn State's offense sometimes have been okay. Ohio State and Michigan have been better than okay, but so has Penn State. So it's not as if defenses in the Big Ten don't face good offenses, even when they face them in the non-conference. So if you're USC, we understand that you can't stop a cold defensively in terms of your program under Lincoln Riley. We know USC will score points, but will they come in and consistently be able to stop people, especially against the run in the Big Ten, because that's what you're going to get. So for those reasons, I think USC will be the fourth or fifth best team in the Big Ten at best. I may be wrong, but that's where I am. So this is where I see a transition into a new conference, possibly hurting a program like Lincoln Riley and USC, although he'll still have probably Heisman Trophy candidates on the offensive side of the football, but they won't be balanced, and that'll be their biggest issue. All right, that's it for your questions here on Second Down. When we come back from the break, it's your boy's favorite segment, Nonsense Narrative, right here on Move the Chains, right after this. Welcome back to Move the Chains. I'm Jonathan Bam Rivers. It's my favorite segment of the show, and I don't want to delay it. It's time for the Nonsense Narrative. Why are good losses a thing in college football? Just tell me. I understand you can lose and make lessons come from that. I understand you can lose and be in a situation to where you're being developed as a team, but why are good losses a thing when people try to say this team deserves to be in the college football playoff or they deserve to compete for a championship? And they make these arguments because, hey, this was a good loss. They played these 4 top 10 teams. Beat some of the top 10 teams. That's what good teams and great teams do. You have a tough schedule, but then you beat teams. You're looking at LSU right here, and Jane Daniels, who won the Heisman last year, is now in Washington, right? Do you know LSU lost 3 games last year? They lost to Florida State, who of course should have been a playoff team. I'm not going to hash that right now. They lost to Ole Miss, whom we understand has been an elite program in the conference, who's also been on the cusp, who will probably make the college football playoff this year. And they lost to Alabama. Who was Alabama? So is anybody crying that LSU didn't make the college football playoff? No, and they shouldn't be crying. Because although LSU was a good team and they lost to 3 good teams, if they win 2 of those games, or maybe even if they win 1 of those games they lost, the conversation could be different. So at some point you have to beat people, and I just don't understand the narrative of good losses, because a lot of times people will take a loss that's a good loss over a win on a team that's a pretty good team. Now, I'm not talking about a team that's outside the Power 5, that's a D2 or D3 team. I get that, and I understand that. Just because you lose 3 games doesn't mean you're not as good as a team that lost no games, depending on your schedule. I understand all of that, okay? I'm not trying to make that argument. What I'm saying is stop using the argument that good losses matter when there aren't good and quality wins to go along with that. Good losses will never trump wins when it comes to Power 5 teams who are competing for a college football playoff berth. And I want to talk about Florida because you see LSU here, and they're also playing Florida in this clip. And I want to talk about the Gators because a lot of people look at the Gators and they feel sorry for Florida. Now, they play Miami to kick off the season. They've got to go play Texas A&M. They go on the road to play Tennessee. And this November slate, guys and ladies, where they play Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State in consecutive weeks is one of the toughest schedules I've ever seen in college football history. But what if Florida, for some reason, ends up 10-2, maybe even 9-3? First of all, it would be a tremendous win for Billy Napier in that program. I think if you're a Florida fan, you would be ecstatic. But see, that's what I mean when I would say a team had more quality wins than they did good losses. Because, yeah, Florida's going to have a bunch of great losses if they're competitive because they play a bunch of great teams. But if Florida's able to beat some of those teams, this could be a season people never forget. So I don't see it as a negative. I see it as an opportunity for the Gators. Because if you want to be a national championship and an SEC contender, you've got to beat some of the best teams in the country. And nobody has a better shot to do that than the Florida Gators. All right, that's it for my nonsense narrative. When we come back from the break, it's the final drive. We'll be back and we'll move the chains right after this. Welcome back in. So we've hit the final segment of the show, so you know what that means. It's time for the final drive. Man, just respect the starting quarterback of the Texas Longhorns and Quinn Ewers. Like, not only was he able to transform his body and his mind and growing strong in his faith, but he, again, took his team on the road to beat Alabama last year, led them to a college football playoff. But I think the biggest thing that Quinn Ewers has done, honestly, is kept a certain individual on the sidelines of Texas that everybody thought would be starting by now, and that's Arch Manning. That's right. Nephew of Eli and Peyton and son of Cooper, Arch Manning hadn't touched the field, and that's because of Quinn Ewers' production. Congratulations, Texas. You've got your guy. All right, remember, you can not only catch Move the Chains on the Sports Leader, WXTX Fox 54, you can also catch us on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the channel at Move_the_Chains. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. It's all appreciated. All right, that's it for this week, ladies and gentlemen. For the best production crew in the business, I'm your boy, Jonathan Bam Rivers, and until next time, God bless.